Monica Ellison entered the classroom with the posture of someone who already knew the battlefield. The auditorium was immense, with endless rows of chairs and scattered students, some engaged in quiet conversations, others immersed in notes. But she knew that as soon as Dr. Richard Henshaw entered, everything would change. It was always like this. The man had a cruel talent for transforming the environment into a constant test, where the weak would break and the strong would learn to survive. She adjusted the strap of her backpack, feeling the weight not only of the books, but of the expectations. She was used to being underestimated, to seeing doubtful looks every time she opened her mouth. However, something inside her told her that today would be different. Not because she expected to be treated fairly, she wasn't that naive, but because she felt that something needed to change. And perhaps it would be her who would take the first step. The murmur in the room died as soon as Dr. Henshaw crossed the door. Tall, slender, and meticulously dressed, he carried a presence that immediately imposed silence. His eyes scanned the class with the precision of a predator, as if he already knew who the targets for the day would be. Monica kept a neutral expression, feeling his gaze pass over her and for a moment stop. It was subtle, but she noticed. He had already made his choice. Miss Ellison. The way he pronounced her name, slowly, as if savoring each syllable, made the room hold its breath. Monica, in turn, kept her face impassive, but her stomach turned. This was his game. Pick a student, break them down piece by piece, and watch as they tried to regroup. It was almost a ritual, and from the reaction of the others, many were already anticipating her defeat. "Come to the board," he ordered, pointing to the vast blackboard covered in chalk remnants. Without hesitation, Monica stood up. She knew that any sign of hesitation would only encourage him more. The walk to the front of the room seemed longer than it should have been. She felt the eyes fixed on her back, some amused, others simply indifferent. To them, this was a spectacle. When she reached the board, Henshaw wrote the equation. It was a monstrosity of interconnected variables, full of mathematical traps designed to expose any logical flaws. Monica immediately realized this wasn't just a test, it was a personal challenge, a blow to prove that she didn't deserve to be there. She grabbed the chalk and with a firm hand began to write. The first stroke of chalk met the board and the silence in the room deepened. Monica didn't hesitate. As her hand moved with precision, her mind was already mapping out the logical paths of the problem. She saw patterns where others saw only disconnected numbers. Instead of following the conventional solution, she chose a more efficient shortcut, a method that required confidence and a deep understanding of the subject. Behind her, the professor crossed his arms, watching her with narrowed eyes. He expected uncertainty, wavering pauses, a trembling hand, but Monica didn't give him that luxury. The tip of the chalk slid across the board, tracing symbols with surgical precision. The initial murmur of the class had ceased. Now everyone was paying attention. What had started as mere curiosity had turned into something more, expectation. She felt Henshaw's heavy gaze burning into her neck, but she didn't allow herself to falter. He wanted her to make a mistake, to make a slight slip for him to grab and publicly dismantle her, but there would be no mistake. When she drew the last line and boxed the answer, absolute silence fell over the room. For a moment, no one moved. Henshaw himself remained still, as if processing what he had just seen. Then he approached, his shoes echoing on the wooden floor, and leaned in to examine the answer. His eyes swept over each line, each step, desperately searching for a mistake, but he found nothing. Finally, he straightened up. His face showed no surprise, but there was a tightness in his jaw that betrayed his frustration. "Interesting," he said coldly, "an unusual approach." Henshaw slowly turned to face the class, as if waiting for someone to challenge what they had just seen. But the silence persisted. He wasn't used to this. Normally, when he dismantled a student in front of everyone, the result was predictable: hesitation, nervousness, submission. But Monica had escaped the trap. And worse, she had done it without leaving room for criticism. She, in turn, maintained her posture, showing no emotion other than firmness. She knew he would try to downplay her victory, that he would look for an angle to regain control of the situation, and that's exactly what happened. With a meticulous movement, Henshaw erased her answer from the board, and without saying a word, began writing another equation, larger, denser, a tangled mess of variables and exponents that made the previous one seem like child's play. Monica heard a whisper from one of the students behind her. "Now she's screwed." The tone wasn't one of contempt, but fascination. They wanted to see how far she could go. Henshaw finished writing and stepped back, his arms crossed. "If your approach is truly valid, you should be able to solve this one too," he declared. The challenge was issued. Monica looked at the board. The equation was intimidating, but not impossible. Any hesitation now would be a victory for him, and that was not an option. She grabbed the chalk again, took a deep breath, and began. The principal sighed and leaned back in his chair, pinching the bridge of his nose, as if he were already tired of the conversation. "Jalen, I understand your point, but the school follows a curriculum approved by the state. It's not up to you to decide what's right or wrong in the material." Jalen tasted bitterness in his mouth. "But if I know something is wrong, shouldn't I question it? Isn't that what the school teaches? Think for ourselves?" The principal pursed his lips, clearly annoyed. "You weren't sent here to think for yourself, Jalen. You were sent because you disrupted the class." The boy shook his head in disbelief. It didn't matter that he was right. What mattered was that he had challenged the system. Easton sighed again, this time more deeply. "Here's what's going to happen. You're suspended for the rest of the day. Go home, reflect on it, and come back tomorrow, ready to follow the rules." The word "suspended" hit Jalen like a blow to the chest. He felt a lump tighten in his throat, but he wouldn't let them see any sign of weakness. With a brief nod, he turned and left the office. The secretary didn't even look up as he passed, as if she had already expected that outcome. In the hallway, the curious looks of a few students pierced his back. He knew what they were thinking. What did he do? But Jalen didn't care about that. What hurt was the injustice. He hadn't fought, hadn't cursed anyone, hadn't done anything except tell the truth. And for that, he was being punished. As he left the school gates, the hot wind from Baton Rouge blew against his face. He walked home with firm steps, feeling the anger grow with every meter. He knew his mother wouldn't be happy about it. This time, Monica took a second longer before starting. Not because she doubted herself, but because she wanted to be sure she was about to dismantle the problem in the most efficient way possible. Henshaw expected to see her stumble, lose her rhythm, get confused by the complexity of the equation. But instead, what he saw was a pattern emerging in real time. The first strokes were careful, building the foundation. Then came the clever cuts, the invisible shortcuts for those who didn't truly understand the subject. She eliminated unnecessary terms, reduced expressions to simpler forms, following a line of reasoning that was unconventional. At times, she paused for a moment, not to hesitate but to anticipate the next steps. The room was still. One of the students leaned forward, eyes fixed on the board as if trying to decipher the logic behind what they were seeing. Another nudged the friend next to him, murmuring, "Dude, look at this." Henshaw, who had started observing with an air of superiority, now wore a too neutral expression, a sign that he was absorbing every detail. When Monica drew the last line and boxed the answer, no one needed to check. Perfection was there, clear, indisputable. And then, before Henshaw could say anything, a new voice was heard. "That was brilliant." The room turned toward the sound, and there she was, Dr. Elaine Parker, sitting at the back of the auditorium, watching everything closely. Dr. Parker's comment shattered the tension like glass breaking on the floor. Her praise wasn't casual. She wasn't the type to give out empty words. Her gaze was fixed on Monica with a glint of genuine admiration. "Most people would take twice as long to solve this, and still do it in a more cumbersome way," she added. crossing her arms. Monica didn't respond immediately. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but her expression remained composed. Henshaw, on the other hand, was rigid. His clenched jaw betrayed the discomfort he was trying to hide. Not only had Monica dismantled his attempt to destabilize her, but now another authority in the room was openly recognizing it. The students exchanged looks. Some who had been laughing quietly before now seemed to reconsider their opinions. Others, who had never noticed Monica before, were now looking at her as if they were seeing something completely new. Henshaw, however, would not give in so easily. He slowly turned to Monica and, without directly acknowledging her victory, declared, "There's still room for discussion on the efficiency of this method." Dr. Parker raised an eyebrow. Which part exactly needs to be discussed? She found the most direct solution, without mistakes, and with a level of understanding that few here would demonstrate. That's not up for discussion. A dense silence hung in the room. Henshaw wasn't used to being challenged. And for the first time, the dynamic seemed to change, not just between him and Monica, but between him and all the students who were watching. Henshaw held Dr. Parker's gaze for a few moments, but anyone in the room could see that, for the first time, he didn't have a ready answer. His usual strategy of belittling students with vague comments and endless challenges wasn't working, and Monica knew this. But instead of confronting him directly, she remained silent. She didn't need to prove anything more. The answer was there on the board, and Parker's recognition had sealed the verdict. The professor turned back to Monica. "Very well," he said finally, but there was something strange in his voice. It wasn't a sincere compliment, but rather an attempt to regain control of the situation. He couldn't just admit that he had lost the battle, not in front of the whole class. So he did what he knew best, redirected the focus. "Since you seem so comfortable with problems of this level, maybe you want to show us how to solve this one." And, with a meticulous gesture, he erased the board and began writing a new equation. This time, something even more elaborate. You could feel the change in the air. Some students, who had been just watching before, were now holding their breath. It was like watching a fight that should have ended, but where one of the fighters refused to accept defeat. Monica looked at the new equation for a moment. It was extensive, with multiple layers of algebraic manipulation, irrational numbers, and overlapping trigonometric functions. An equation tailor-made to confuse and wear her down. Henshaw wanted to push her to the limit, and maybe on another day that would have shaken her, but not today. She took a step forward, grabbed the chalk again, and began. But this time, something changed in the way the room reacted. No longer were there those condescending looks waiting for her to fail. On the contrary, now people were genuinely curious. Some even leaned forward to see better. What was most impressive was that, as Monica wrote, the students began to follow along. What had once seemed like just a show for the professor to see a student stumble was now becoming a moment of genuine learning. She wrote fluently with confidence, and her approach brought clarity to something that before seemed like an indecipherable maze. Henshaw noticed. The authority he once held was slipping through his fingers. Before, he was the only one whose knowledge dominated the room. But now, the students weren't just paying attention to Monica, they were learning from her. When she finished the last step and highlighted the answer, a murmur spread through the auditorium. It wasn't the mocking whisper from the start of the class. It was a contained admiration, the kind of sound that precedes recognition that hasn't yet been fully verbalized. Dr. Parker smiled slightly, as if she already knew this would happen. "I think your question has been answered, Richard," she said, without taking her eyes off the board. Henshaw opened his mouth to retort, but there was nothing he could say without sounding pathetic. He had challenged Monica, not once, but twice. And both times, she had surpassed him. The air in the room was tense, but now there was a slight vibration, like when you feel that something is about to transform. Monica didn't look at her peers or the professor. She already knew what she needed to know. This moment wasn't about proving anything else to herself. It was about reaffirming the certainty that she had control of the situation. And that's what she did. It wasn't arrogance, but solid confidence, earned over the years of facing obstacles, some visible, some invisible, on her academic journey. She had always known she would be relentlessly challenged, but she also knew she would never have to submit to anyone. The room's reaction was slow at first, but soon it spread. Those who had once mocked her presence were now absorbed, feeling the weight of what had just happened. Monica hadn't just solved the problem. She had done it in a way no one else would have imagined, which placed her on a completely different level. And the most interesting part was that she wasn't alone. The environment around her was changing. It was no longer an isolated battle between her and Henshaw. It was a change in the dynamic of the entire auditorium. She could feel it. When a student stood up and murmured, "She did the impossible," the impact of their words crossed the room like a wave, causing others to begin discussing the solution she had given. Monica didn't need public approval. She knew that, but she felt a slight satisfaction as she saw that instead of keeping their distance, the others were, for the first time, recognizing the value of her approach. Henshaw didn't speak. His rigid posture betrayed how uncomfortable he was, and the fact that he had no more words to disqualify Monica's solution showed that he had been irrefutably defeated. But, unlike what many expected, he didn't explode in anger. He simply turned and began erasing the board. In his mind, he was still trying to find some point of failure, some detail that could reverse the game, but there was nothing left. The last equation had been solved masterfully, and Henshaw knew it. He who prided himself on his ability to subjugate students was seeing a rupture in the order of things. Monica was not just a student he had challenged. She was forcing a reflection he wasn't ready to accept. She didn't need him to recognize her. She had already recognized herself. As he erased the last remnants of the lesson, Monica grabbed her backpack and slowly walked back to her seat. Her steps were firm, unhurried, and the movement of her head was not that of someone hiding, but of someone who knew they had just conquered something much bigger than a simple approval. The shine in the eyes of the other students said it all. The battle was won, and although she knew Henshaw would challenge her again, she was no longer afraid. Today, she had taken the first step toward breaking an invisible barrier, not just for herself, but for everyone who had witnessed it. The class ended, but Monica knew something had changed irreversibly. When the students started to get up to leave, she remained seated, almost as if absorbing what had just happened. The murmur in the room was something new. People who had previously ignored or even looked down on her now approached with a different attitude. Gazes that had once been indifferent or condescending now carried a mix of curiosity and respect. While packing up her materials and preparing to leave, she heard a familiar voice approaching. It was Jordan, her friend, who had been in the same class and had watched everything from the back of the room. "I can't believe it. You made Henshaw swallow his tongue. He looked like he was about to explode when Dr. Parker cut him off." Jordan was excited and couldn't hide the smile on his face. For him, seeing Monica shine in front of such a feared professor was a personal victory. Monica smiled briefly, but there was no euphoria in her gaze. For her, what had happened that day held a deeper meaning. It wasn't just about winning a specific battle against Henshaw. It was about the feeling that she had finally freed herself from the expectations imposed on her, that maybe, at some point, she had found a way to validate her own excellence. "It wasn't just about Henshaw," she replied calmly. "It was about everyone who was there, who didn't see me before." She grabbed her backpack and stood up. "Today, I'm not just another student. Today, things changed." Jordan laughed, but Monica could tell he understood what she meant. "You know he's going to challenge you again, right?" He said it in a playful tone, but there was a slight concern in his voice. Henshaw was relentless, and Monica knew that. "Yes, I know." And next time, I'll be even more prepared." She gave a wry smile, an expression of someone who had not only faced a challenge, but who was becoming more and more certain of her ability to overcome them. As she left the room, Monica felt the weight of the lesson, not as a burden, but as something that finally made sense. For so long, she had had to fight for every little victory, every piece of respect she earned. But now, after that day, the dynamic was different. She knew she didn't have to wait for permissions or external validations. She didn't need to wait to be recognized. She already knew who she was. As she walked through the campus, Jordan's words echoed in her mind. "You know he's going to challenge you again." And she knew that, yes, that would happen. Henshaw wouldn't give up so easily, but that didn't matter anymore. What she had now wasn't just a momentary victory. It was confidence in her own ability, the conviction that she had already claimed her place in this world. As she crossed the campus toward the dorm, Monica grabbed her phone and quickly opened the messaging app. She typed a short and to-the-point message to Jordan. "Henshaw tried to bring me down today. He couldn't. I'll tell you more later." She put the phone in her pocket, but couldn't help a slight smile on her face as she imagined her friend's reaction. Jordan had always been by her side, following her small daily battles and celebrating her victories as if they were his own. The campus seemed livelier that morning, despite the cloudy sky and the light drizzle that had started to fall. Students rushed by with their umbrellas open, some complaining about the unexpected rain. But Monica didn't even feel the drops hitting her face. She was immersed in her own thoughts, mentally replaying every moment of the lesson, every step taken, every word left unsaid, every calculated gesture. All of it now made sense. She knew exactly what she had done in that classroom. She had claimed space in a territory where she was normally ignored, and perhaps even despised. As she walked, she heard hurried footsteps behind her. She turned and saw Jordan running through the rain, without an umbrella, his hair disheveled and a big smile on his face. "Monica," he called, getting closer with heavy breaths. "I had to tell you one more thing before you leave." She stopped, waiting, and he continued, catching his breath. "What you did today was bigger than you think. It's not just about you facing Henshaw. It's about everyone who watched. You showed everyone that it's possible to face this kind of pressure without breaking." Monica felt a lump in her throat. She knew he was right, but hearing those words out loud from someone who knew her so well stirred something inside her. "You know what's even stranger?" she finally responded, letting some of the emotion built up throughout the day show. "I didn't do any of this thinking about inspiring anyone. I just did what I had to do." Jordan shook his head, smiling. "Maybe that's exactly why you succeeded. You didn't do it to impress anyone. You did it because it was the right thing, because you knew you could. And everyone saw that." He raised his eyebrows playfully and added, "Including Henshaw." She laughed for the first time since entering that classroom. It was a light, authentic laugh, almost unexpected after all the tension of the day. She felt strangely light, as if, for the first time, she could breathe deeply without the constant weight of others' doubts on her shoulders. Perhaps that was the main point of that difficult morning, realizing that external respect and validation might matter, but never more than what she knew about her own abilities. Monica said goodbye to Jordan and continued on her way to her dorm. As the rain slowly picked up, each drop seemed to wash away part of the pressure that had built up over the years, as she had constantly had to prove her worth. She reflected on the fact that, despite everything she had achieved that day, the battles were still far from over. Tomorrow, the day after, and many other days, she would still face similar challenges, and probably do so in front of people like Henshaw, who would try to minimize her accomplishments to protect their own ego or authority. But now, something had changed inside her forever. When she entered her room, she took off her backpack and placed it on the chair, sitting slowly on the bed. It wasn't just a fleeting feeling of victory she was experiencing. It was the realization that she had redefined her own story, and perhaps without realizing it, started to transform the space around her. The invisible barriers, once so solid, now had small cracks, fissures opened by the strength of her courage in that crowded auditorium. Monica grabbed her phone again and saw a series of messages from classmates, some praising her courage, others asking for help to better understand the method she had used in class. It was ironic to realize that just hours earlier, no one would have given her attention or enough value to ask for an explanation. Now, they not only recognized her talent, but were willing to learn from her. She held no grudges, no resentment. She understood that sometimes people only see what is clearly placed in front of them. As she briefly responded to the messages, Monica felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had fought her entire life for the simple right to be seen, heard, and taken seriously. Today, she had finally achieved that in a way no one could take away. She no longer needed external validation to confirm who she was, but she clearly understood the importance of that moment. She had opened doors not only for herself, but perhaps for others who would face similar challenges in the future. When she lay down that night, the soft sound of the rain outside seemed to tell her that, although many battles were still ahead, this one, specifically, she had already won. Monica closed her eyes and took a deep breath, absolutely certain that from now on, she would never again accept anything less than what she knew she deserved. She wouldn't wait for respect to be given to her. Today, in front of everyone, she had made it clear that respect was not something given freely. It was something earned, and she had just earned it definitively. As she fell asleep, Monica realized that this was one of those rare experiences capable of transforming lives, not because it was easy or perfect, but precisely because it was real, hard, and deeply human. She knew that deep down, the hardest journey would always be the one within herself, learning that her value wasn't in someone else's gaze. Now, she had finally understood.